Hello, Brad here, just to say we're super proud that the Friday 5pm podcast is sponsored by the Malt Miller, the UK's best home brew store.
We use the Malt Miller for all of our homebrew experiments, as well as tapping them up for advice and binging on their awesome YouTube channel all the time.
That's why whenever we release a homebrew video, we put a recipe kit live on the Malt Miller, so you can brew with the exact same amazing ingredients that we did. The same ingredients used by pro brewers.
So alongside the Malt Miller's nitro-flushed hops, cold-stored yeast and milled-to-order malts, you can pick up recipe kits for our 5 Points Best Bitter, Russian River West Coast IPA, and now the fastest beer in the world, a hazy session IPA that goes from grain to glass in less than 48 hours.
Sign up to their newsletter at tinyurl.com/Malt Miller to get 5% off your first order. With the Malt Miller's amazing customer service and Johnny's 48-hour recipe, you could order the ingredients on a Monday and be drinking the beer by the weekend.
Speaking of which, it's Friday.
It's 5pm.
So enjoy this week's Friday 5pm podcast. It's Friday, it's 5pm, and about 24 hours after we recorded last week's podcast, I was in the pub, Bradley.
Wow.
We just pretty much signed off the episode for that week.
Yes.
And I went into the best cask pub near me. Shout out to the Half Moon in Hitchin. It's a Champions Club Timothy Taylor pub.
Great.
Unsparkled landlord.
Unsparkled landlord.
Unsparkled landlord.
You are very much north of London, but you're very much in the south of England, Johnny. What's that about?
I think we discussed this last week. I think we agreed I was northern.
Oh, but what, in your location where you live? Not where you live.
No, we did it sarcastically, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a real, I guess, wake-up kind of moment, because we've spent all this time talking about how certain beers should be served on Sparkler, and then a Champions Club pub has decided not to serve it on Sparkler. I don't know whether the brewery's aware. I don't know if you have to use a Sparkler to be part of the Champions Club, which is sort of their recommended pubs, and I think they're on a map on the website and stuff. But yeah, I had an unsparkled Timmy's. It was good. Really nice.
It was good. Okay, there you go. So it's all good, basically, is what we're saying. If it's fresh, if it's going through the lines fast enough, if the cellarmanship is great, if you've watched last week's video and you understand all of this, Oshin's wrong then, is what you're saying. I think he's right.
No, whoa. I'm not saying he is. I'm not saying he is wrong. I'm not saying that anybody is wrong. That was the point of our video.
I know. I'm jesting. But yeah, it's kind of like, well, I don't know. I still think Timmy's probably should be through a sparkler. So I
agree. That's why I brought it up.
Yeah. I'm a bit outraged by that, especially if it's in a sort of prize-winning scheme of a pub that's,
Well, yeah, that was the thing, because a couple of weeks ago we had an unsparkled pint in a Timmy Taylor's. Sorry, in a pub that wasn't a Timmy Taylor's sort of recommended pub, and we were like, that's weird, but it's fine. But this one, I was surprised to see a Champions Club pub not serving it on Sparkler. And again, as we say in the video, the more important thing is that the beer's well looked after. That's what delivers a great pint.
100%.
But it was interesting, and we'll dig into the comments later in the podcast. But the amount of entirely unbacked up opinion and misinformation out there about this tiny bit of plastic is just incredible.
I had a conversation with Phil from the Fez, who you may have seen in our micropub episode from Series 1 of Keep Cask Alive last weekend, and we were talking about I was talking about us drinking through a sparkler versus not a sparkler. And he is a man of the north. He's from, I believe, Hartlepool. And he said something pretty, what would I say? Fiery. Shots fired kind of styly. Saying, so he's from the north. He says that sparklers were invented purely to sell beer past its best. And to agitate a beer that was on its way out, to hide sort of off flavour smells that you might get, to kind of basically bash them out of the beer and bring it back into condition as you were pulling it up through the beer engine.
I'm about 80% sure we talked about this last week, Bradders.
Did we?
Yeah.
I don't think we did, but okay.
Well,
Sorry.
you've definitely told me. I don't know whether you've told the listener.
I don't think we. I don't know. I know we've had this conversation, but I thought I thought it was pertinent.
This is the issue with running the Craft Beer channel and doing a video and a podcast every week. You forget what's your real life
together every day.
Yeah, what's your real life and what isn't. But I mean, so Phil is bang wrong.
Well,
as far as I know from digging into history, that there is absolutely no suggestion that was the purpose of the sparkler.
Yeah, that man serves his beer really, really well, and I like that he's quite opinionated and he's from the north, and I love his beer and I love his pub. So he all of his stuff's gravity fed. So he's only got a tiny little micro pub, but honestly, I've never had a bad pint. They're always amazing. Obviously, you can't stick a sparkler on one of those because he hasn't even got like beer engines out in his little.
Yeah, it would drip out pretty slowly.
Yeah, it's a tiny little sort of store cupboard of a room that's got amazing beer in it. But I just thought it was an interesting point of view. But I think we discussed.
Well, I think points of view have to be based on fact. You can't dismiss fact and call it opinion. That's kind of what's happening in America right now. Like the historical fact is the sparkler was not invented to hide anything. So he can have an opinion about how it affects the flavour. But I don't think it's valid to say that people serving it on sparkler are hiding the fact that their beer is off. I mean, there's no denying that a sparkler will help a tired pint.
Well, he didn't say off, but he said on the way out. So like something that's going towards being out of condition, it brings it back a bit.
I mean, that is 100% true. You could see it in the video we shot it wasn't in the video. It was sort of a behind-the-scenes thing. That we poured the first pint, and then Steve, shout out to Steve, he's a Patreon, and he runs that pub, certainly the cellar element of that pub. He was not happy with the condition of the beer. He just changed the barrel, so we pulled it through. So clearly there was a bit of the last cask in the line.
Yeah.
And he pulled it through until the beer was in perfect condition. And I couldn't actually see the difference because we were pulling through a sparkler at that point. But he could tell immediately.
Yeah, that's true.
But other pubs are using that to see, I think definitely pubs have the ability to hide a beer that's out of condition with a sparkler. But I don't think that's how pubs really use it. And I certainly think that isn't what it was invented for.
No, I mean, we'll take it with a bit of a pinch of salt, but I thought it was an interesting point of view. I've probably said he'll like die on this hill or whatever, but he was just like going, Brad, did you know this kind of thing? But yeah,
there's a kind of belief out there. I haven't seen it in the comments for this video, but that I've seen it put out by people that gravity is the purest form of cask ale, and everything else is kind of hiding its condition.
Yeah.
And to be fair to Phil, again, I mean, if you look in my book, A Year in Beer, and if you look in the video we shot, every beer that he pours is beautiful, has a lovely, tight, thick, domed head on top. Yep. Like, he looks after his beer perfectly, and therefore you could almost think it came out of a sparkler sometimes. And I think maybe he believes that as well, and you see that a lot. And really, really well-conditioned beer doesn't necessarily need a beer engine or a sparkler. So he's right in that regard, and he lives and breathes by that. I only take issue with the historical bent he's added to his opinion.
Okay, so it's not like a long life milk then, the sparkler. It's not adding some secret sauce that makes... When you open it, you're having some cereal in the morning, or porridge. Obviously, as I have porridge these days, as I'm old. But you sort of whiff the milk and go, "Oh, not sure about that. I'll just put that milk for a sparkler. That'd be all good."
I don't think that would do.
That won't work. It won't work.
No. Also, if you've got a beer engine hooked up in your kitchen for said milk.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Of course I haven't. No. Has anyone ever put anything else other than beer through a beer engine? could you, for instance, put pre-mixed cocktails through a beer engine, or frozen margaritas or something?
Maybe it'd be a way of, you know how when you like have a whiskey sour and you get that lovely creamy texture.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you could serve your whiskey sours through a
I
sparkler.
like that.
I wouldn't want
That's
to
good.
clean that
No, the lines.
sparkler or line afterwards, but
That's cool, though.
the other thing I just want to quickly say is that there are people out there that say or believe the exact opposite of Phil, in that they believe that the sparkler knocks condition and texture out of beer.
Yeah.
So we've had that quite a bit in the comments, and I'll read one later. But yeah, let's. I have completely. We had the plan for the podcast. I said I've got a way to start it, and we've gone straight into sparkler chat. So let's take a little break. We'll do some important beer news, and then we'll come back into the comments and see what other fires we manage to light later. So the first bit of news I want to pick up on, because it's something that's very close to home for us, and people might not be aware of it, although it has started to sort of hit mainstream news, is the fact that High Hill, which is the tap room of Hackney Brewery, and it's where we run our festival, Love and Beer, is being forced to shut.
Yeah, it's pretty. Well, it's a rubbish situation, really, and it's due to the council, and it's due to COVID repayments, and being a tenant of a council that is unwilling to support a thriving business that brings a lot of tourism to the area. It's a beer mile on that estate, and they are not being supportive to their tenants, and demanding things which I'm sure are impossible for anyone to kind of do on the spot. So it seems very unfair, Johnny. And we love those guys.
To give it a bit more context, firstly, about this time last year, Hackney Brewery had to renegotiate its COVID debts, essentially. Yeah. And that sort of pushed out into the world basically a notification that they were in debt trouble and this kind of stuff. And Hackney Brewery managed to essentially, through an arbitrator, argue that they hadn't done anything wrong. They were paying back their debts. There was no issue here, but the council was trying to call it in, basically. And the reason the council are trying to do that is because the council itself is in billions of pounds of debt. It's one of those ones that the politicians always talk about as being like pretty much a failing council, basically.
Yeah.
So they are definitely trying to call in the debts from COVID, from small businesses, to stop themselves going under. But what they're essentially doing as a result of that is specifically really punishing hospitality businesses which had to close. They were the ones that took the brunt of the COVID lockdowns, and so they're the ones now taking the brunt of the council's lack of financial planning. And it's not just Hackney Hill. So Wildcard, I think it was at the end of last year, had to close for the exact same reason, basically, because they couldn't service their loans, so the council went, well, you're done, and they were booted out of their property. Beerbullfish, just down the road, I don't think they specifically blamed the council or the rents, but said that just spiralling costs of everything meant that they had to close. So we've gone essentially from having a beer mile to having no Beerbullfish, no Wildcard, Hackney unable to serve on premise, which, let's be real, and I don't know this, the brewery haven't said it to me, but that's going to cause serious stress on their business, because even if it's not a major part of their profit, it's a major part of their cash flow, because it's money that comes straight in rather than having to wait 30 days for pubs to pay.
Yeah.
So we're left with, Hackney that can't serve, which means we have Exhale, we have Signature, we have the wine place Renegade, and we have what was Truman's and is now the Big Penny, which is sort of a giant beer hall. It's not really a beer mile anymore, is it? It's two breweries, a beer hall, and a winemaker. So they are systematically destroying the hospitality element that's grown up in this previously pretty run-down, empty estate.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's incredibly short-sighted of the council, although I understand that they can only think in the short term if they're in that level of debt.
Do you know, like 20 years ago, Johnny, you wouldn't have thought that industrial estates could become a tourist destination throughout London, and that's something that the beer industry has pretty much single-handedly created in regenerating, bringing life and people with spending power into areas that were previously just full of white van men picking up and
Yeah, and I
dropping
mean, it's
off
had
bits
its
and
negative
bobs.
impact. It's definitely raised the rent for people that aren't in those kinds of businesses. And I think certainly in Bermondsey, it's resulted in some local historic businesses being booted out because landlords wanted more kind of salubrious clients. But it's definitely had a positive impact, I think, on the culture of these slightly down and out areas of London. And it's wild to see it being purposefully stripped away, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's what's going on, which is, pretty tragic, to be honest. And
the local MP has come out and made a statement on, I think it was on Instagram even, very modern, essentially sitting on the fence a little bit, but saying that she is engaging with the council and working out what can be done, because I think that she recognises that this isn't a one-off case. This is happening to breweries, but also probably to something we should have explained at the start. The council is the landlord of many of these businesses. So I think she's aware that if the council is servicing its debt, or needs to service its debt, it's going to be its tenants that take the brunt of it. So she's having to be, her job is to be the representative of the people, while the council is not so much the representative of the people, but the people trying to run this place. And so there's tension there, and she's trying to, I guess, do the best that she can, but hasn't managed to have a positive impact yet.
Yeah.
So if you live in that region, if you're under the same MP whose name I've forgotten under the pressure of this podcast, a Labour MP, write to her, show your support to Hackney, order their beer if you see it in pubs, in bottle shops, and online. And hopefully we'll have some good news to share. In terms of what it means for our festival, we haven't, because of Keep Cask Alive, we haven't managed to actually sit down and start planning anything really yet. We were still talking about maybe a different date, because the actual date that we had was not ideal for the malt miller, or indeed for anybody in the industry, because it's harvest time. There's a big tech thing in Germany that week, I think. And lots of other reasons. So we were looking at moving date. We weren't necessarily looking at moving venue, but now we might have to. So things are still up in the air until after Keep Cask Alive. But yeah, please do speak to your representative about this and support your local breweries. Speaking of which, another way in which the government is truly screwing everybody over is that the changes made in the budget in the autumn are coming home to roost. So Shep, sponsors of our Keep Cask Alive series, and in fact the sort of the main character of episodes 2 and a little bit in episode 2, what are we on, episode 7 and episode 11,
sounds about right.
Have had to raise their prices because of essentially the NI, national insurance hike. So as we are trying to save cask ale, the British government is essentially making it more expensive to produce and simply exist as a brewery. Yeah,
so to the tune of about £2.6 million a year for Shepherd Beam. That's the
estimated
the
cost,
real world
sort
of estimated cost. So they're raising prices, Johnny. They're the oldest company of its type in the UK, in terms of owning that amount of pubs, and obviously the oldest, brewery that's still going in the UK. But it just shows that they have to kind of roll with the times. We were actually there the day that these changes were announced.
Yeah, we were there for the budget, and amazingly, Jonathan Neame let us do the interview. It was about an hour before the budget was going to happen, wasn't it? He was did the interview, had a little chat with us, and then was like, I've got to go because everything changes today, basically.
Yeah, it was a wild day.
Yeah, we knew it was coming.
Yeah, but it's it's not negative on them. It's a negative on the government that they're kind of not supporting these small businesses in the way that they should. And the NI thing is just squeezing employers to
I mean, it was such, I was celebrating the idea of Labour getting in, not so much because I like Labour, but because the Tories have made such a mess of everything. But it really feels like they've made some exceptionally poor decisions in terms of how they've gone after trying to fill this deficit. And again, as it always seems to be, hospitality's borne the brunt of it. And I think, it shouldn't be an easy target because it's a pretty vocal industry. It's a pretty, to be cynical about it, quite, if you, every year when the duty on beer is frozen, there's a big celebration and the Sun and the Mirror go, woo, pints just got cheaper, which is complete nonsense. They're still getting more expensive. So it's seen as like a popular thing to support, and yet sort of clandestinely, governments always seem to target hospitality, restaurants, pubs, breweries, winemakers, whatever it is. And in particular, also now spirits producers have been pretty hard hit by the latest budget. And it's just one thing after another, because as I said earlier, hospitality businesses were the ones dealing with the biggest COVID debt because they were the ones that were completely unable to trade, really. And I cannot understand what data these people are looking at that implies that A, the hospitality industry has the money to pay, and B, that it won't have knock-on effects on the rest of the economy. And, to be fair, in the report around Sheps and the announcements they made, they said that they did make better profit in 2024. But they put much of that down to actually a switch away from the off-trade, further away from supermarkets, and to focus more on draft beer in pubs, which would have been a decision made off the very sensible decision to tax draft beer lower than packaged beer, to try and drive people into the pubs. And thankfully, that's really helped them this time because there's a better profit margin there. So, I mean, that is a good decision that the government has made. I think that was the Tory government that initially introduced that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if prices rise, if your pint gets more expensive, it is not the brewery's fault. The breweries are doing their best to give you the most delicious beer at the best price that they can, but they are being hamstrung by, I think, completely misguided decisions, or if not misguided, miscalculated decisions about who needs to pay and who can pay to fix the financial situation. Should we move on to some happier news?
Yeah.
I've got a nice one, which you might not really care about that much, but it made me chuckle. So, as I'm sure you're aware, Bradley, over the weekend, Newcastle won their first major trophy. Newcastle Football Club won their first major trophy for 70 years.
Oh, that's good. Okay, well, good. Well done, Newcastle. That's cool.
Yeah, well done them and the Saudi Arabian company that's whitewashing itself through its ownership.
Oh, well, okay.
This is... yeah, I've managed to make a happy story dark. So the story is that there's a man who he saved. I should say a Newcastle fan who saved a beer for 29 years, waiting for the next major trophy.
Yeah.
So he was given a beer. This is the best thing. So John Booth from Kendal, Cumbria, kept a can of Newcastle Brown in the fridge since 1990. I love that it's in his fridge as well. Since 1996, when it was given to him at a barbecue by a Liverpool supporter. At the time, Newcastle were 12 points ahead in the Premier League, and Mr. Booth told his friend he would drink it when the club won the title later that year.
Jeez.
Famously, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
They were overtaken by Manchester United very famously, and he's kept that beer ever since, and finally got to drink it.
What was the beer again? Sorry, which was the particular beer? Or
it's Nuki Brown, mate.
Oh, it's a Nuki Brown. So that's not going to be any good, is it? Let's be honest. That's in a clear glass bottle. Is it clear or is it brown?
It's actually it's in a can.
It's in a can. Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Do you want to hear his review?
Yeah, go on. I'd love to hear his review.
He said it was very cold.
Okay, that's good. The fridge is still working after...
It's been in the fridge since 1996.
Yeah.
And tasted very metally.
Oh, God. That's not good, is
I
it?
didn't drink it all, of course.
Metally. You don't want a metallic beer out of a can that's slowly rusting away from the inside.
Yeah, I mean, I doubt that it would have been rusting away from inside. I think that would have been oxidation, which can present as metally.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Or it could be corrosion. But either way, very happy for Mr. Booth.
Yes.
Less happy for the owners
belly.
of the club. And yeah, not so happy for his belly. So I hope he had a decent beer after. I mean, I'm sure he did. Newcastle have waited a long time for that. And it's very cool they got there.
I've got beers that I want us to drink in a video that are over 40 years old. So I've got some beers that are from what's it called? Charles and Diana's wedding, I think, and some
That's
other
like 80. Was it
81.
80,
So that's like
81 was it? Right.
43 or whatever years ago now. Yeah, I think it would be fun to try these beers. And I've got some other weird old beers as well, which I've bought at boot sales. So they're like total wild card. They've obviously just been, they could have been floating in the ocean for 40 years for all we know. I doubt they've been stored in a fridge. So yeah, I'd be interested to know what the beer expert could make of them in a blind taste test potentially, or or just with me. I think that would be a fun / dangerous video.
I dread to think how I'd feel if I drank like 10 or 20, 40-year-old beers.
Well, like what we could do is, I think we should match them with. We could have like a table full of like weird, and like smelly, exotic snacks. So maybe some funky cheeses and some other rogue things that might normally, be like pretty extreme for beer, but they might work with beers that are that old. I don't know. I'm thinking on the spot here, Johnny. But yeah, like matching with 40-year-old beers could be pretty interesting.
I'm in. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I can't see how that could backfire.
Yeah.
Some more news, Untapped related. So Untapped have, right at the start of the year / March, released their beers of the year for last year.
Okay.
So this is their community awards. Obviously, it's based off of all of the reviews. The interesting thing that I wanted to pull out from it. So 11 million users.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Just over 7,000 breweries recognized across the globe in 267 beer styles. I didn't know.
That's wild.
I'm not sure I could sit down and name 267 different beer styles.
Is that more countries than in the world? I'm trying to think how many countries in the world.
Yeah, it must be. Yeah,
That's mental.
More styles than countries in the world. But it's got a heavy US bias. So
Right.
over half of the breweries that are listed, more than half, just under half, are there's some bad maths here in Forbes. It says that 3,444 is more than half of 7,032, which is so wrong. But anyway, strong US bias where they've released the breweries that won the most awards from their community awards.
Yeah.
And I was looking to see how many we've been to.
Oh, okay, interesting.
And indeed the geographical spread. So they're almost all northeastern breweries.
Wow, okay.
So
That's cool.
we've got Treehouse won the most with 160, by far and away the most, 160, followed by Sapwood Cellars,
Okay.
which big geeks and homebrewers will know very well because of the owner. Then Hill Farmstead in third, Shilling Beer, which we looked at going to and couldn't quite squeeze it in when we did that New England trip.
Yeah.
Then Dogfish, still keeping the quality high. Anchorage Brewing, who I've heard great things about in Alaska, would be a really fun trip.
Yeah.
Boiler Brewing in Nebraska, who I've never heard of. Side Project Brewing, who I went to, I guess, 2 years ago now when I was in St. Louis. Fox Farm Brewing, which I believe is where M from Pints and Panels works.
Huh.
And then Fabled Brewworks in Kentucky, which I've never heard of.
Nice.
But
Got
so yeah,
some-
we've actually only been to three of the top 10 in the world, or really we should say top 10 in America.
We got some exploring to do. Yeah.
Apparently so. We need to go. I mean, most of them were. So it's Connecticut, New Hampshire,
Alaska.
Massachusetts, Vermont, like very much sort of New England-y, northeasterly based. And then, Alaska, Nebraska, and Maryland.
Maryland.
Well, I guess Maryland's kind of northeastern. Certainly East Coast. So we could do it in 2 trips.
Yeah. I mean, I'm up for a trip.
Well, one trip. I could see the thumbnail now. We visited the top 10 breweries in the world in one trip.
Yeah.
You'd be exhausted.
You would be exhausted, and so would our bank accounts.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, it would bankrupt us. It would absolutely bankrupt us. But hey, we didn't get in it for the money. The money would be nice. Yeah. Have you got any news?
Yeah, well, I guess I've got some American news, Johnny, which I thought was quite fun. It's disappeared now, typical. But basically, our friend of the channel, Beer Aficionado, has said that the CEO of Anheuser-Busch wants to change what we call beers like Coors, like American macro beers in America, from being domestic. They're known as domestic beers. Like Miller, Coors, all these sort of beers. He wants them to be called American beer now.
Yeah.
So it kind of sort of positions them as patriotic beers to be drinking. And I think speaks volumes about what's going on in America right now with the sort of political situation that they're in over there. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. But it's such a weird thing to put out into the world because obviously there is not a single Coors drinker that calls it domestic beer.
No, they're gonna say Coors, aren't they, or whatever your beer is. You're not saying.
Or
well,
maybe they already call it American beer, and the CEO is trying to say, "Let's embrace that."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really weird bit of news that I saw. That I guess it's only being picked up because of the kind of the jingoistic president that they have, and the way that America is sort of presenting itself at the moment. Very weird, and I think quite counter to. From my experience, a lot, it's a global business, right? It's not even owned by any Americans, it's Belgian/Brazilian. So it's quite an interesting, entirely hypocritical thing to do, to be like, America, yeah, but with a Belgian-Brazilian accent.
Well, I guess this quite an interesting, not deception, but like a kind of positioning, the type of people that might want to drink American beer in that sense is interesting to think about. And maybe obviously they're thinking it's a marketing thing, right? But it's interesting. I guess I don't go into a pub and say I'll have a British beer, please, because I guess I know quite a lot about beer at this point, and I can tell where a beer's from because I usually know where the brewery is and everything. But would a guy drinking a macro be that bothered about where it's from? I don't know. It's a weird one, isn't it?
They might be like, I want something brewed in America. I could hear people.
I know
people saying that, like we say we want a local beer when we travel.
There's a big sort of sentiment for American-made goods, which has been sort of brewing for years now. So I wonder if it taps into that sort of mentality a bit, which is like people feel the loss of craft in America. Because obviously it was an industrial powerhouse like the UK. And a lot of the, production, the factories, all of this kind of stuff has moved out of the country. I feel like there probably is a bit of an identity crisis in the sort of working man kind of mentality in America, where they might want to hold on to something that's American made, or you know what I mean? I think it probably plays into that, which doesn't mean you're a bad person, or you're kind of like anti something that isn't the same as you or whatever. I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but I think it speaks to a sort of longing for craft, but you couldn't call any of these beers craft. So I think it might be another way of sort of tapping into, it's not craft beer, but how can we make it sound more crafty, more local, more appealing?
I don't think it's craft. I think it's pretty soft nationalism, really. It's industry that they're begrudging the loss of more than craft.
Yeah.
I think definitely there's a subset of Americans that really miss that artisan industries, but most of them, because towns have been gutted by the loss of industry, as international other countries have been able to produce things cheaper. I think it's the loss of industry, and I think certainly the the macro beers and the people that drink them probably feel that keenness, both economically and sort of from an identity standpoint. So yeah, really weird thing for them to come out saying. But yeah, like you said at the start, kind of a sign of the times. Speaking of sign of the times, this was a headline that both you and I picked up on. We're like, what? That's not happening. Well, actually, when I read the headline, I thought it was something else. It said, so this is the Express, so you know it's true.
Yeah.
The surprising fruity pints that are becoming the UK's fastest growing beer trend. So within the beer bubble, you think, oh, they're saying that New England IPA is sort of getting out to the mainstream, I guess.
Yeah.
But no. What they're talking about is lager with essentially fruit syrup or fruit flavouring in.
Oh, dear.
It's apparently, according to Tesco, I think it is,
right,
the fastest growing beer category now, which last year was, of course, Nitro Stout. This year, it's basically badly made lager with, like, peach flavouring added.
Is this... And this is how are they calling this already? Because we're so early into the year. And who's drinking peachy lagers when it's freezing outside?
It's true. You do see them. So there's that brand Jubal.
Yeah, Jubal, yeah.
Which, personal opinion, is rancid. Is all over. I've seen it in basically every supermarket. And increasingly, like, you know, more SKUs as the people that make it. They don't make anything. The people that own it probably call it. And so I understand that it is growing in the off-trade, but I don't really think that equates to the story that the Express has put out into the world, calling it the UK's fastest growing beer trend. I think that's probably still Guinness. But the thing that caught my eye and made me want to talk about it is that Tesco beer buyer Ben Cole blames craft. And to be fair to him, he's probably right. So he says, the soaring demand for fruit-led brews, particularly lager, has taken the UK drinks market by storm and is the biggest trend to hit the beer scene since the craft boom started more than 15 years ago. Don't think that's true, Ben. The trend actually has its roots in the craft beer movement because it introduced beers with tropical fruit profiles to more drinkers than ever before. I think that's certainly true, and I've often talked on this podcast and on the Craft Beer channel about my concerns, not about the silly beers themselves, you know, the smoothie sours and this kind of stuff, but about the impact that they have in that it potentially creates this notion that that's all that craft beer is about, like silly, stupid, big flavours, when that's definitely not how I see craft beer. But it seems that the impact has maybe gone further than that, in that now contract breweries with, you know, zero care for the joy that is beer are sort of co-opting that and creating lagers essentially with some of the flavours from New England IPA in.
Yeah.
I would say to Ben Cole, though, that I don't necessarily think, while there's certainly been some influence from the craft beer movement, you can see it in the way that Jubal and the other brands are branded. They look like modern craft beers.
Yeah.
Probably the greater influence is fruited ciders.
Yeah, which again is sort of like straddling palatability for people that maybe don't like beer, but like really, really
or
sweet.
Indeed good cider.
Or cider, but they're like really, really sweet stuff that tastes like fruit juice or whatever.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I'm certain if you look at the packaging, which I never really have closely, it probably says something about, you know, also being low cal and this kind of stuff, whereas those ciders were obviously very, very sugary. So I think there's probably a health benefit to it, a calorie reduction to it, and a craft element to it that creates, you know, instead of sweetened cider with fruit syrup in a bottle, it's now, I guess, mostly unsweetened bad lager with fruit syrup in a can, because that's craft, apparently.
Blimey. Wow.
So, yeah, we're all going to be drinking that in a couple of years if the Express is to be, to be believed.
No. Yeah, I don't think I can face that. Yeah, I won't be looking forward to that after a hard week. But yeah, There you go.
Yeah, can you imagine? After a hard day at work, you come home and you crack open your peach lager. They've got peach, mango. This is Jubal. Peach, mango, blood orange, lemon, and grapefruit.
It sounds like the lineup of an Italian sparkling sugary beverage manufacturer, San Pellegrino, to me.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? They might have taken inspiration directly from there as well.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, so craft beer slightly to blame, but I don't think we should be too hard on ourselves.
No, definitely not.
A little bit hard on ourselves, not too hard. Right, that is all the beer news for this week. Loads of beer news, loads of stuff going on, just not all necessarily that positive.
Talk for 40 minutes beer news, Johnny. It's the most...
Yeah, there you go.
The most
incredible, must be a record.
Beery, newsy podcast we've ever made, potentially.
I reckon I've never entered this podcast into any awards because I've always been like, well, they look at it and go, this isn't a beer podcast. But maybe this episode. Maybe this is the one.
This could be it, Johnny. Let's not blow it now.
Who knows? So, right, let's dig into this week's video, which was, of course, called The Perfect Pour. It was episode 10 of Keep Cask Alive. And it was all about what goes into brewing a delicious, almost delicious-looking pint, and what goes into serving a delicious-looking pint, which we used. Used is a bad term. We went to the Devonshire because that is the pub that is best known for being incredible at the right presentation. And as we talked about, it's not just the Guinness that they do beautifully. And as we talk about in the video, they look after their casks super well. And those beers that we drank were on point, weren't they?
They're absolutely fantastic. Gotta give it to Oisin. Like, the man knows cask, loves casks, breathes cask, despite the fact that he's, birthed the biggest sort of scene of influencers that the planet's ever known. It's sort of congregating on his trifecta in that little part of Piccadilly, or so I guess edge of Soho. It's a wild place. It's absolutely mental. The sort of fever of Guinness headiness that's there, present every time you go there. But glad to see that, lots of people were propping up the bar, drinking cask, and absolutely loving it through Sparkler for the Timmies, and, straight out the engine from London Pride. So he's kind of doing it right, as far as I can see. He's kind of nailing it all round. And I just thought it was great. It's kind of, I guess, popular for a reason, Johnny. It's pretty great.
I think so. It's hard not to respect. And, it hasn't come out of nowhere because his pub before, the Guinea Grill, was very much in the same vein and was fantastic with its cask and was, very much loved by the industry. But so we took inspiration from him and then went out into the world to learn about what happens before that point, essentially.
Yeah.
So we went to tell the story of Isinglass, which, as far as I'm aware, has never been told before. And for that reason, I think there's lots and lots of misinformation out there about, what's in your beer, why it's in your beer, how much of it is in your beer, and indeed what the history of it is and why it's still used today, even though there are now alternatives. And I think it's a real marker of the fact that we probably got it about right, because there hasn't been the backlash I was worried about. I think people have taken the information on board and gone, hey, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Didn't know. And I'm certainly less bothered about Isinglass as a concept and in my beer than I was before. And indeed, I champion the fact, I went to Burton Bridge Brewery while I was there, which is run by two former Cloudwater employees. So they've moved out to Burton and they've taken over an old brew pub that makes classic British cask ale. And they're using Isinglass for the reason that I think it should be used, which is A, it's the best at the job, and B, it's the heritage that we have. It is a vital part of the cask ale scene and has been for centuries, and so they want to stick with that, particularly coming from Burton, where so much of it comes from.
100%, mate. Have we? I've got a comment for you, Johnny. Isinglass related. Sorry.
Yeah, hit me.
From friend of the show, Father Earth 93. Great piece on Isinglass. Only undercut ever so slightly by my need to sing. They're taking the hobbits to Isinglass, 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 in my head for 10 minutes straight. Are you aware of that meme?
I am, yeah.
I also do that, Father Earth 93. So you're not alone. There are many of us out there. We number in the tens. That's in my head quite a lot when I sort of think of Lord of the Rings and Isinglass. So I thought that was pretty funny. It's not a very deep.
I mean, it's
comment,
remarkable.
but...
I wonder if there's the horse, there's the train. Do you reckon Tolkien thought Isinglass sounded awesome and just gave it a little tweak for Isengard?
I think so. I mean, it does sound awesome, doesn't it? Isinglass is like, it does sound like it's straight out of a Tolkien book. It sounds magical, and I guess it kind of is magical, even though.
Yeah, I'd agree. I agree. I think there was a bit in the interview with Sarah where we called it a miracle, and it had to go because I don't know if you noticed, right at the end of that interview, for some reason Sarah's mic cut out, so I spent about 2 hours fixing the audio there just for the final minute of that interview. So there was a bit of gold that I sadly couldn't use, which is just the reality of shooting on location. So yeah, I'm really pleased with how that came together, and I think it tells a really interesting story. And hopefully, we weren't necessarily looking to change people's minds, but I just wanted everybody to have all the facts,
Yeah.
And I think most of them are there. There were a couple of comments about how maybe we didn't dig deep enough into, well, two things. One is that we didn't dig deep enough into why people want clear beer, which I considered doing in the VO, but it's such a complicated topic with a lot of history around it, and obviously has then been completely undone by the last decade of hazy IPA. But also a little bit more around the vegetarian vegan thing and the alternatives that are involved. And I feel like we touched on it because we definitely said that it's probably not vegetarian, although a lot of vegetarians make an exception, like a lot of vegetarians do for rennet in cheese, and indeed gelatin in sweets.
Yep.
But I think we also touched on it and saying, these alternatives are very, very good at what they do, but they focus on the protein element, which is a bit tricky for cask ale because obviously if you've got secondary fermentation, you need something that will filter things out multiple times, and indeed filter out yeast specifically multiple times, because you get that haze again when you have that secondary fermentation. So that's why you can't just filter a cask ale, stick it in, and it'll be bright, because you have that secondary fermentation, which creates haze again. So Isinglass is still the absolute best thing we have. The alternatives are nearly as good. But obviously, if you are vegan or vegetarian inclined, it's a complete game changer, and they weren't there, what would it be, 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah. It's all. I mean, it's really interesting stuff to think about where it might go in the future. But I think it was in a comment someone said, or maybe you said that in response to a comment. I can't find it now, but basically it's isn't it? It's kind of interesting that we still use it, and it is one of the original ingredients in cask ale. So it's like if you were to do a Reinheitsgebot of what cask ale is, how you define it, what should be in it, then probably Isinglass should be in it, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Germans would disagree fundamentally, but probably it would be within that definition, because it is so important to the processing of cask ale. So hopefully you all enjoyed that, and then we got to the bit that caused all the consternation in the comments, which is the sparkler, which is still just insane to me. I think it's because it's tied up with identity between the North and the South that it creates so much disagreement. But there's a comment I want to bring out from Andrew Greenwood 2462.
Yes.
He started off a whole conversation with his comment. But he starts with saying Southern beer should not be flat. 100% agree, Andrew Greenwood. It should not be flat. There should be head on it. I was amazed to hear the Timothy Taylor brewer say that when he was working at where was he? Producer of the brewery that he started at in Oxfordshire, they serve it flat as a mill pond, which is not how beer should be served. Doesn't matter what the style is. But Andrew then said it hasn't had the carbonation knocked out of it, which is, he's implying that that's what sparklers do, which is untrue. Northerners accept short measures due to the sparkler, also untrue. A sparkler is likely to create a false amount of life to a beer that has been poorly looked after in the cellar. Semi-true. There is absolutely nothing to recommend the sparkler for. Desperately untrue. The Grove pub in Huddersfield serves its beer without sparklers unless requested when I last visited, as they realise how bad sparklers are. Can't comment, haven't been to the Grove for years. Unfortunately, there is no point in trying to explain to anyone who likes sparkled beer how much damage a sparkler does. To which I just replied, have you watched the video? Because we have one of the most experienced, award-winning championed brewers in the world explaining how none of that is accurate. How, yes, it knocks a little bit of carbonation out. That's how it creates the specific head. But these beers are brewed to account for that. You know, if you talk to any landlord about Timothy Taylor's, it is a highly carbonated beer. And if you don't know what you're doing, incredibly hard to look after. And as a result, you get that tight, creamy head and lots of that body. Also, Northerners do not accept short pours. No. Most pours, if they're in a pint to rim, that is accounted for in the head. You get a 5% leeway with the head legally. And lots of pubs up north, not all of them, as some of the comments after this implied, serve in pint to line, so slightly bigger glasses. And I think all pubs should be serving in pint to line, so that you can account for that head on top and still get a pint of liquid. So this is what I was talking about, all the misinformation that's bound up by the fact that people see this as an identity marker as well. It means we gloss over the facts because it suits our narrative, essentially. As we said in the video multiple times, the care for the cask beer and the intention of the brewer are the only two things that matter, and then personal preference, whether you like it with or without a sparkler. Those are the only three things that matter. All the sparkler does is change the texture and, to some extent, the bitterness, as we found, which was interesting because as we talked to Timothy Taylor's and Kirkstall, they all sort of said that northern beers were generally more bitter, and then they serve on sparkler, which makes it even more bitter. And you wonder, I think a lot of southern brewers would take real exception to the idea that northern beers are more bitter. Certainly Shepherd Neame would. But maybe that extra bitterness is coming from that sparkled texture that, as we said, described it, 1,000 knives attacking your tongue.
Definitely. I think, everything you just said's spot on, mate. Spooky Guy had an interesting comment because I learnt a new word. I'm a southerner is absolutely pro sparkler on all cask beer. I just love that textural heterogeneity you get with it. I had to Google that one, but I liked the word. I thought it was good. It basically means,
and you can nearly say it.
Heterogeneity. Geneity. How would you say that?
Heterogeneity.
That's what I said. Heterogeneity.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Okay. The quality or state of being diverse in character or content. So that's an interesting way of looking at it. But I like that. Thanks for telling me a new word.
I think I replied to a lot of comments with diversity of beer, diversity of texture. That's what we're looking for in cask beer, in craft beer, in macro beer. Diversity in all of its forms is glorious because it makes the world a little bit richer and interesting.
Yeah, I think
and
also
so this is why the sparkler non-sparkler debate annoys me, because it's like, just isn't it nice we've got different things?
Yeah, different things are good. My palate isn't as attuned as yours, Johnny.
You always say that. I'm not sure it's true.
I think texture is a mouthfeel and all this kind of stuff plays a bigger role. Not a bigger role, but it's a big role to me as much as the flavour. And I think that's because I'm a little bit weird around texture in food. Certain textures like freak me out. I don't eat tomatoes and things because I don't like all the different textures. My brain's a bit weird. But basically, I think that, texture in pints is kind of crucial to the experience for me. I definitely have textures that I know and love, and other times I'm like, well, it's a bit thin, or it's a bit too soupy or whatever. But it just has to be right, Johnny. It has to be right. texturally.
Well, honestly, when it comes to the production of food on industrial scales,
yeah,
there are entire teams dedicated to texture.
texture,
I don't think
yeah.
you're weird in thinking that. That is
yeah,
a well-known
mm.
phenomenon in human palates, that texture is if not, it's probably not as important as flavour, obviously,
no.
but it is hugely
there.
important, and therefore there's a huge diversity of preference in terms of texture as well. But there are certain things that you can do to really make sure that it appeals to humans. You know, crisps need to be crispy, bread needs to be doughy. You know, all of these things that we know are true, and we find the best ways to create that texture, which in mass production usually means chemicals. In beer, it means debates about sparklers. It means debates about Lucas pours. It means spunding versus injecting CO2 in, and all these little differences. Bottle conditioning, this kind of stuff. We're always looking for the perfect texture, and maybe there isn't the perfect texture for beer, and it obviously depends on style. But preferences matter, and I think you probably lean towards the sparkler, right?
You know what? I did until we just, made this whole series, Johnny, and I've realised that to sparkler or not sparkler, it's at the end of the day, it's the condition and how that beer's been treated that really matters. So, like that comment said, your Southern Pint shouldn't be flat. It should have a head on it. It should be a frothier head rather than a tighter sort of foamier head. But it's all about the condition of the beer and what's appropriate as well. Like Oshin said, that's right. It should be for the North. It should be for a sparkler. Stimmy's it should be for a sparkler. Pride shouldn't. I think there's something about that as well. Like going back to what's what the tradition is, and what maybe almost doesn't even matter at this point why up north it's through a sparkler, but the fact that it is, I think we should kind of respect that. And Andy LeMan, or Andy the Man as I like to call him, very nice man, he said I don't know what he said actually. I don't know where I was going with that, but he was a southerner that had been basically converted to I know where I was going. Basically, he said that all of the beers they brew are kind of, the recipe has been engineered so it would taste amazing for a sparkler. So that is what every brewer is doing. Every cask ale producer, they know what their beer should be served through, and their recipe is like aimed texturally, flavor wise. All the experience is aimed towards that pour at the bar and making it perfect. And that's what we need to know in the day. These people are artisans. They know what they're doing. And, if you're going somewhere to a great pub where they know what they're doing, you're going to drink the best pint you've ever had. Fresh bread of beer, Johnny. Fresh bread of beer.
Fresh bread of beer. Yeah, totally agree. And the whole north-south divide thing, I think, it's not quite a straw man, because it definitely has an impact in that most of the breweries up north are designing their beers to be drunk through a sparkler.
Yeah.
But down south, it's not once you're south, there's no sparklers. 5 Points put all their beer through sparkler.
Yeah.
Partly because, the two owners are from the north. But, it's down to the brewery, and generally that means north you'll have a sparkler, but it doesn't mean always. As always, we should listen to the experts and indeed trust our own palates. And that's all we've got time for this week. So next week we've got an episode all about the pub, which we're very excited to put out into the world. We're doing a pub crawl with Historic Pub Crawls himself, Tom Vosper. We're meeting an academic who studies pubs. And we are, of course, going back to Shepherd Neame, the oldest brewer in the world and also the owner of 300 magnificent pubs, where sadly, because of the government, pints are now just a little bit more expensive. But we will see you for a epic pub crawl of London's most historic pubs next Wednesday at 5 p.m. And, of course, again, Friday 5 p.m. we'll be with you to read through those comments. To welcome you to the weekend. So go out, have some sparkled on some non-sparkled pints this weekend, but just make sure you know what the brewer intended. Love and beer. The The Bubble and Friday 5pm podcasts are brought to you by the nerds behind YouTube's craft beer channel. You can watch over 400 mini documentaries at youtube.com/the craft beer channel, and if you love what we do, support us via Patreon and get access to merchandise and our amazing Discord forum, a positive and welcoming space for everyone who loves beer, food and homebrewing. Love and beer.